Okay. Uh, one more time. Let's see.
Did I hear you say one at a time?
Levels change regularly. Okay, give me a 10 count, Tony.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2. You like for me to count again? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10.
No, give me a second here. I'm testing your audio. I'm not.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Trying to find something to read here.
I cleared up for a second. Hold on.
I don't know what to read. That's I'm looking at the Washington Post.
Oh,
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Mm-hmm.
Okay. I've got Andrew's code for the YouTube. So let me. Try it again. Just a second.
okay. Disconnect, reconnect. Hold on a second.
Okay, that's right. Okay.
Gus, you need me to count some more?
Yes, sort of
1,
continuously
2,
because I
3.
can't be over there at that spot for a second. Hold on.
Okay, I can barely hear you.
I said
Um,
yes. I need you to continuously make some noise.
Continuously make some noise. Wow.
Yeah, I mean talking something
I've
so
been
I can.
told that I'm good at that. So I'm just going to read this news article I'm reading that is, I don't know, it's really nothing. So I asked a media savvy friend recently to guess who's the most watched program on TV right now. Hannity's show, she offered. Nope, it's World News Tonight on ABC, I told her. With David Muir. A blank look followed. It's true. As news hungry viewers seek credible information on virus pandemic, the ratings for ABC's weeknight newscast is not only beating the likes of Sean Hannity on Fox, but also favorites like The Voice, NCIS, and 60 Minutes. The other evening news programs anchored by NBC's Lester Holt and CBS's Norah O'Donnell are also on the roll. These tightly edited half-hour broadcasts distill the day's events, at times providing an austere contrast to President Trump's daily
Now, can you hear me, Tony?
briefings. Yes, I can. I can hear you fine, Vess. Or was that Andrew? Whoever asked if I could hear them. Yes, I can hear them. Can you hear me? I'm reading an article, which are often airing simultaneously elsewhere. The answer to the anxiety people are feeling isn't to deliver a portrait that is rosier than reality, Neil told me last week. ABC,
How much for the
ABC is leading the evening news network, averaging ratings to over 12 million viewers double points in its coverage of college football. So much more equal attention. And it is recent interview with Trump was considered a huge radio news win with more than 5 million. I interviewed Mira on a bench just outside Central Park, the ABC News studio. Both of us were wearing masks and keeping 6 feet of social distance between us. Although Mira has a broadcast ready set up in his West Village home, he's been making a short trip uptown every day to do the newscasts in the eerily deserted ABC studio along with a skeleton. It's a day-to-day decision, he told me. It's Jim. Hey, Jim.
Just checking in.
Yeah, hey, Jim, hold on one second. So that you know, because they need a constant voice, I'm not going to mute my mic in my conversation with you. So Brian
That's
and
fine. I won't say anything
Okay.
bad about anybody.
okay, Brian and Vance and Andrew Dollar are hearing our conversation. So, okay, go ahead.
Those a-holes. No, I'm kidding. Everything going all right? I mean,
We're
we're
wor-
testing. It's working.
we're working through it. It's a test, so we're not there yet. No, we're not there yet.
Okay.
It's
All right.
we're working through it. How did your presentation go?
I haven't done mine yet.
Oh, okay.
Brittany led off. Ollie is going now. I thought I would take a little break.
Okay.
Check.
So yeah, we are working through it. I can't say that we have success or failure right now. I'm not saying either, but we are working through it.
All right. I appreciate it. Shoot me a text. Put it this way. If you know for sure it ain't going to work, let me know.
I will.
can fight it.
Brian Dunbar's on too, so I'm quite sure we will all let you know.
If everything is awesome, then you can tell me that too, but not as big of a deal. I just want to flag for the folks that are asking if we couldn't pull it together.
Okay. Will
All
do.
right, thanks.
Bye bye. So I'm quite sure everybody heard that conversation. Brian, did you hear that?
I did hear that.
Okay.
So I'm going to put, we've got the two ends. We got the original WebEx and we've got the page online. I just put the URL in the chat. So what we're looking for is obviously to hear our audio through that YouTube window.
And this is scheduled to start at 4:30, right?
That is. I did hear that. So I'm going to put, we've got the two ends. We got the original WebEx and we've got the page online. I just put the URL in the chat. So what we're looking for is obviously to hear our audio through that YouTube window. And I think I just did.
I definitely heard the conversation again, and I heard you talking. You didn't move your lips.
I'm going to have like 5 different feedback loops in this conversation, pal.
I know, right?
we got the original WebEx and we got the page online. Just put the URL in the chat. So what we're looking for is obviously to hear our audio through that YouTube window. And I just did.
Again, and I heard you talking. You didn't move your lips.
We at least have like 5 different feedback loops in this conversation.
I know, right?
We got the original WebEx and we got the page online. It's the URL in the chat. Okay, so this you hear our audio. YouTube window. And I think I just did.
Again, I heard you talking. You didn't move your lips.
Hey, Tony?
Yes.
Okay, I'm hearing you on the computer that's receiving the WebEx, but it won't let me put out the audio, so I'm just troubleshooting something, that's all. Give me a minute.
Say that again, Vess.
I said I can hear you on the WebEx, on the speaker, in the computer, in the laptop that's receiving the WebEx, but I cannot output it on my HDMI, and I'm just troubleshooting something, that's all.
Okay.
So,
All right,
so
did you hear that?
I just need to continually hear noise so I
Oh,
can,
you need to continue.
because I have to step away from the front of the,
I'll go back to my little story I was reading here, just to provide some noise, not for anything else, if anyone else is listening to this. It's a day-to-day decision, he told me, but as long as I can come in, I will. Muir sees an odd paradox in the importance of being a steady presence for his audience in this moment. His popularity with viewers, he's convinced, has been built up over the years in part by taking them along as he globetrots to Iraq for reporting on the Islamic State, or to Auschwitz, the site of the former concentration camp in then occupied Poland, to talk with survivors 75 years after their liberation. I always believed in going where the story takes you, to be there and breathe it in, he said. That has been the core of what he offers the viewer. Come with me to experience the story. But now, the inverse is true. The important thing is to stay here and to be in that chair at that set time, he said. When the pandemic hits, it's not the technology you trust. It has to be in the works for a long time. Like cable news, all of the newscasts tend to attract an older audience for whom it is going to the viewer or previous to just before or just beginning. But in these strange days, news tonight has been set off by those politically sought after figures known as the the newscast found over 3 million of those volunteer youngsters during the first week of April. ABC hopes to keep around once the emergency feelings. Social media is part of that effort. Years recent interview with Bill and Melinda Gates attracted more than 500,000 social media views, including on Instagram, and ABC News spokesman told me. I asked ABC News President John Golston why he put Muir, then only 40, in an anchor chair to succeed Diane Sawyer in 2018. Longevity is not a given in the TV anchor business. CBS Evening News has had Scott Pelley, Jeff Gore, and now O'Donnell in that lead evening news position since 2017. When Diane said she was ready to step down, I was essentially a non-decision, Goldstein said. Muir, who has been with ABC since 2003 and had been Sawyer's chief substitute, was ready. Especially his visits and sometimes revisit individuals who embody courage or otherwise warm the heart. Last year was particularly viewing when he does the podcast. He mentioned his parents still living in the Syracuse, New York area, who grew up, went to public
Hey,
schools,
you
and
beast.
graduated magna cum laude from Ithaca College before starting his reporting career at WTV, HTV in Syracuse. And
Okay,
WC.
I've got it. Thank you.
I do think about what what won't waste their time, what will set their mind at ease, he said, observing that his parents' reactions to news stories probably affect his approach more than they realize. While it's not Muir's role to dictate coverage, he can influence it, like when he recently called Texas-based correspondent Marcus Moore, who was interviewing people waiting in line at the San Antonio Food Bank. I asked him to let them tell their stories while looking into the camera, Muir recalled, adding that he was grateful to have the kind of working relationship that made such a conversation productive. Moore's segment landed with emotion. Out-of-work Texans described how they had never imagined themselves needing charity, or, in the case of one father, the pain of not knowing how to answer a child's question about what's for dinner. In a recent assessment of the evening news shows, my colleague Hank Sturver, the Post TV critic, described the broadcasts as strikingly similar to each other and almost shockingly neutral in tone and content. I asked Muir what exactly World News Tonight is trying to do. Is the idea to take things right down the middle, equal time for both sides of every equation, whether valid or not. Muir said that's
Hey,
not
Tony,
the
can you hear me?
unless you think it's wise. Rather, he hopes to cut through the noise for the folks at home, to emphasize common ground. People do have shared fears and shared concern. In America, in America's intensely polarized media and political environment, that's food for thought. And there seems to be.
Okay, Tony, can you hear me?
I can hear you fine.
I can hear you fine now, and I am now streaming out sound only. I mean, I have to send something out with it, so I'm sending color bars, but it's sound only. Does Andrew hear that?
Andrew, this is Tony. Do you hear me? This is sending you. He's sending out. He has to send out some video. So the video. Uh,
I can send black, no problem.
okay. So he's sending black. Actually, I don't know if he prefer bars or not. But anyway, Andrew, this is Tony. Can you hear me? He's sending out audio. He's not. Come on, man. My foot's stuck. Okay. Andrew says, I'm on mute. Okay. So that does mean you can hear me, correct? Brian, are you still there? Can you hear me? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Brian Dunbar, this is Tony. Can you hear me? Hey, Brian, this is Tony. Can you hear me? Okay. Brian, I can see your lips moving, but I cannot hear you. One, two, three, four, five, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Yes.
So, Vesh, you can hear me fine. I hear you. I haven't
Yes.
heard from anyone else though.
Oh, okay.
So Brian's lips moving, but I could not see Brian. Can you bring Brian up? Oh no, who?
No,
No, you can't. No, you can't.
I'm just a listener, yeah. I'm
Yeah,
just a participant.
this is WebEx. So WebEx is supposed to bring up whoever talks, correct, Brian? Nod your head. I can see you nodding your head, but I cannot hear you. Yeah, WebEx brings up. It's not vMix where we punch in the person. It's WebEx where it is supposed to bring in the next person, whoever talks.
Okay, this is, you still can't hear me, is that right?
No, I hear you
Yes,
now.
Okay,
yes.
I hear you.
I didn't change anything. I just checked my system preferences and it looked like my mic was up. But in any case, and if you heard me, I got off from the meeting and just listened on YouTube and I could hear things fine. So I think we're ready to go. Is there a question that anyone feels needs to be answered?
Yes,
We haven't heard from Andrew Dollar, so I don't know if it's working or not. Yeah,
Andrew, you're still on, right? I see you're muted.
this is Andrew Dollar. I won't be speaking. But we need to know if the test is working. I'm on mute to avoid a feedback loop. Okay, that's fine. Um,
Yeah.
but do you consider this test? Since I'm streaming my system audio. Okay, so Andrew, I can see what you're putting up on the screen. What we need to know, we understand that you can't answer us audibly. Do you consider this a good test or not? That's what we need to know.
Yes, I
You're
can.
faked. Brian, did you hear that?
Okay. I did. I did. The web page was good. Like I say, I got off of the meeting and just listened on YouTube just to make sure I was hearing what was coming out over the system. And I've had some folks from the web team check and they're hearing. So yeah, I think we're good. I think we ought to plan to be online. Try to be online like 10 minutes before or 15 minutes before at 4:15 to get everything set up if you're ready to go.
Okay, and just so everybody knows, um, the TV group is going to record the WebEx. So if there's an issue, we will record it from beginning to end, and we will. And I have an editor standing by who could put. Mark Haley has created a slate,
Great.
so the editor can put a slate on the front end and a meatball on the back end, which does not take long at all. And we'll be able to have it ready for upload purposes or for reload purposes. I'm sorry.
Okay. I thought I just heard the volume just go up, down, and then back up. So I'm not sure. And occasionally a lot of static going in the background.
I wasn't moving at all. I was just reading. Just sitting here. You can see me scroll. As I was
No,
reading, scrolling on my screen.
not scrolling, the volume level. It went
Okay.
down and then up, down and then back up with occasional like static in the background. Okay. Your acoustics in your kitchen stuff, Johnny.
Yeah. You're right. I need to hang some slabs of meat in here to absorb some of the sound.
All right, unless there's something really pressing, let's plan to reconvene on the WebEx at 4:15 to do all the tests, and I'll get with Karen to get all the information out to you guys.
Okay, copy that.
Okay,
Thank you.
okay.
Thanks, everybody.
Copy.
All right.
Okay.
Okay. All right. So as long as the RTMP URL stays the same. You have to do it again. Okay. All right. Let it go.
Okay, great. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. Really appreciate it, guys.
All right.
Bye.
Okay. Jeff, just want to confirm with you that we are live and ready to go.
You are ready to go.
Okay. All right. Excellent. Thank you, everybody, for dialing in to have this conversation with us today. NASA folks have been hard at work finding ways to use their rare and exceptional abilities and knowledge, skill sets to help in the federal response to coronavirus. Today we have some of those experts with us, as well as our administrator and our deputy associate administrator and deputy administrator. And I'm going to kick this over to our administrator, Jim Bridenstine, right now to talk a bit about what we've been up to.
Well, Karen, thank you so much. I appreciate everybody joining us. As you can imagine, we've been really busy at NASA. A lot of people working at home, doing, quite frankly, amazing work. But at the same time, it's not always easy because we spend a lot of time in the same house with our children who are out of school, and not just our children, but also our spouses who are also sometimes working from home. So I know it's been rough for a lot of the NASA families, but at the same time, we're still getting great work done. And of course, one of the things that we're focused on is a response to how do we defeat the coronavirus, and how do we support the folks that have the coronavirus. So NASA has some amazing people, very intelligent people, very capable people that are committed to the cause. And we wanted to highlight some of those activities that we've been involved in. To start, we have with us Kathy Mangum, who is with us. She's the Deputy Associate Administrator at NASA headquarters. And she's been leading an effort we call NASA at Work, which is really a way that we get all of our people engaged in ideas for how do we take the things that NASA is really good at and use those capabilities in the fight against the coronavirus. So Kathy, if you would just give us an update on NASA at Work, share with everybody what it is and then how we're using it and how we can see it being used in the future.
All right, great. Thanks, Jim. Yeah, we had sort of a cry from our employees who are always willing to jump in and help, that they wanted a way, how can we contribute? How can we help fight this challenge? So we have a tool called NASA at Work. It's a crowdsourcing platform that we use for all kinds of technical challenges in the agency. So we quickly put together a challenge. We worked with the White House and other government agencies to say, where best do you need NASA's help? And of course, the two areas that came to mind were ventilation devices and sterilization and decontamination, those kinds of things. We began the challenge on April 1st. And in just 2 weeks, we had over 250 ideas that were submitted, over 500 comments where we had other technical experts commenting on those ideas. And then we actually had about 4,500 people who voted up those ideas, which ones were the most promising. So we took those and we actually brought together a team of subject matter experts who reviewed all the submissions and kind of tried to find those most promising ideas. And what was really interesting to me, it was the total workforce that helped. We had ideas from, hey, can we get our astronauts who are trained in how to deal with isolation to talk to our employees about how do you deal with that at home, all the way to carbon nanotubes that can be used as a base and a sensor for some sort of breath analyzer. So it really touched all of our workforce and came up with fantastic ideas. In addition to the NASA at Work Challenge, we actually had parts of our agency workforce developing ideas sort of along their natural work lines too. So they've responded quickly to this health crisis. And next you'll hear more from both our doctor and the folks who really jumped in on this as we go further in this process. So Jim, I'll turn it back to you.
Thank you, Kathy. So next we'll go to Dr. JD Polk. He is the Chief of Health and Medical at NASA. He's the person we rely to make sure that our folks are safe. And then after JD, we're going to talk about some very unique work that's being done out at JPL as it relates to ventilators. If you tell a rocket scientist to stay at home, it's amazing what they'll do while they're staying at home. But JD, we'll start with you, Dr. Polk, if you'll just give us an update on the things that you've been working on and how you've been trying to organize the agency around, optimizing our response to the coronavirus.
Thanks, Jim. One of the things that we heard about these patients was that they were taking higher pressures on the ventilator and that they were difficult to ventilate. They had stiff lungs. There were specific requirements with these COVID patients. And the folks at JPL, and you'll hear about that more, but they decided to invent a ventilator literally within weeks from the drawing board of Leon's living room, probably, to a prototype that works, that has higher pressures, what we call PEEP, or positive end expiratory pressures, that allow that oxygen to be driven into the alveoli of the lungs. And also, what's pretty unique about this vent, and they'll talk about it more too, is that it has 1/7 of the parts that a normal ventilator has. And they did it on purpose to avoid the supply chain and competing with other ventilators. They've also got a lot of different interfaces that they've used on this ventilator to make it very simplistic and easy to use. It's pretty interesting, and they've fielded that this last week to Mount Sinai in New York. For the folks that are on the front lines that were working on this COVID with patients, putting it through its paces with a mannequin and some of the anesthesiology team to see if they could make this work like they would with other COVID patients in the ventilator, and it did really, really well. The emergency use authorization was submitted to the FDA yesterday, and we're looking forward to hearing back from the FDA on that one. But they'll talk about that more. The other one being what we call a CPAP helmet, which is a device that gives pressure, but without the patient being intubated or without that tube being in their throat. And I'm sure folks in the media have seen many of the people in Italy wearing these hoods or helmets that allows us to give oxygen, but pressurize it, again, with that PEEP, but for a patient, and hopefully a subset of patients, that we can avoid the ventilator, which frees up the ventilator for more critical or serious patients. And so Armstrong has been working with folks out in the Antelope Valley, or what we colloquially call the Aerospace Valley, because of our relationship also with several aerospace companies there. And they have designed and built and amplified and taken other designs and improved upon them for that CPAP hood, and they'll talk about that more. And then also, how do you sterilize things like an ambulance, and what technologies to use for EMS to sterilize those things. So we've been working on several of those. 2 of those devices, the ventilator and the CPAP, are already going through the emergency use authorization for the FDA. And I'll let the experts talk about their wares and what great work they've done.
Thank you, Dr. Polk. And if you'll stay with us, I'm sure at the end there'll be questions, and I'll defer probably a lot of those to you, Dr. Polk. Let's see, we'll go to, if we can talk to David Gallagher. He's our resident expert from NASA's Jet Propulsion Laboratory, and he has been part of this effort to create these ventilators that use, as Dr. Polk said, 1/7 the amount of parts. Of course, the idea is to drive down cost and increase the speed of manufacturing. So, David, if you would share with us kind of what your team's been working on there.
Thanks very much, Jim, and thanks, JD. First of all, I'm Dave Gallagher. I think it says Bettina under my name. She was kind enough to loan me her computer. I have to start out really by saying I'm truly inspired. This is a great story, and I'm inspired by the ingenuity and intellect of my colleagues at NASA. It's remarkable. The men and women of JPL have no idea how to give up on something or say it's impossible. And this is kind of the story of that. I'm sure most of you know we build spacecraft. We don't build medical devices, but this is really a story that's different than that. I think, Jim, in our main building at JPL, there's a big quote on the wall from the famous Teddy Roosevelt speech, "Dare mighty things." And people come to NASA and JPL to land on Mars and put people on the moon and, launch Voyager 45 years ago. That's why people come to NASA and JPL. who would have thought that those same particular set of skills would have come up with a ICU ventilator in a matter of 4 to 5 weeks to treat COVID-19. It's a great story. As JD said, started with a clean sheet of paper. When we started stay at home, a couple of our engineers just were really frustrated with wanting to help and wanting to figure out something to do, and jumped in, and they designed this thing from the beginning with manufacturability in mind. It's got, kind of an order of magnitude fewer parts, very simple components, around 80 parts in this thing. And it's really designed to not interrupt the manufacturing chain for the mainstream, big, highly complex ventilators that are designed to deal with any situation. This is a COVID-19 intubation ventilator. And as Dr. Polk said, it's designed to deal with high pressure situations for less compliance in the lung. And that's not easy to do. As Dr. Polk said, we got this thing to Mount Sinai, who's been a partner from day one, as well as the FDA partner from day one. We brought doctors from the front line. We brought manufacturing experts and the best engineers we have at JPL. And that was delivered a few days ago to Mount Sinai. The testing was outstanding. We submitted the emergency use authorization, and we should, with any luck, in 24, 48 hours have approval from the FDA. And then on Friday, Caltech is issuing a royalty-free industry production partner licensing call. And this means that anybody from industry can come in and manufacture this ventilator at a very low cost and in a very high speed. We've already seen a lot of interest in that, so we're excited about that. So that's kind of the story. I'd be remiss if I didn't shout out to a team of 30 or 40 people who have worked 7 days a week since the stay-at-home order about 4.5 weeks ago. And again, I'm just incredibly proud of the team we have here. It's amazing. Thanks, Jim.
Thank you, David. And I think a couple of points you made there that are very important. Number one, not to disrupt the supply chain. These are parts that don't take away anything from the supply chain, from the mainstream manufacturers that you identified. The idea that you can create it with 1/7 the amount of parts, and the idea that Caltech, of course, which hosts NASA's JPL, is willing to license that to manufacturers without any kind of royalty, demonstrates just an amazing commitment to this activity. As I've started talking here, I'm going to change my camera so that people can see it. It's the white box on the screen there. I don't know if you can see it, but that right there is the ventilator, and as you can see, it's pretty small. It's pretty small in size. And the other thing that's really magnificent is we're talking about 3 weeks. In a matter of 3 weeks, JPL's scientists and engineers came up with this idea, and we're within hours of getting FDA approval. Correct me if I'm wrong, David, but that's emergency use authorization, right?
That's correct. And just to pile on to what you said, it's actually quite simple to use. Part of the testing at Mount Sinai, again, guided by their doctors and respiratory therapists, was to make sure that this is something that, once manufactured, could be put to use quickly without a huge amount of training. But it's ready to go. It's a very exciting system, and we're eager to get these manufactured and in the hands of people who need them.
Awesome. Well, thank you for that update. And of course, if you'll stick around for questions here, if people have questions. Next thing I'd like to talk about is surface decontamination. One of the challenges we have is with coronavirus, making sure that surfaces are clean. And I know all of us across the nation are focused on wiping down surfaces, washing our hands, doing all of the things to make sure that we kill this virus. NASA actually partnered with a private company a number of years ago to help with this effort. and they came up with a product called Ambusat. And I know, I think Mara Meyer is with us. Mara, can you give us an update on what is this device that is called Ambusat? How does it work? And ultimately, what are the benefits that we're going to get from it? Mara Meyer from Glenn Research Center, are you on the phone?
Yes, I am. Can you hear me now?
I got you loud and clear.
Okay, good. So I'm Marit Meyer from NASA Glenn Research Center in Cleveland, Ohio, and our center is contributing to solutions for the pandemic through disinfection, as Jim said. And the company that we're working with is called Emergency Products and Research, which is EP&R for short. They first interacted with us through a technology consultation program in our Regional Economics Development Program in 2015. And my colleague Sharon Miller helped develop the Ambustat product. And it basically uses a liquid sterilant that is atomized, or you make a fog out of it. You make tiny droplets that float around in a closed volume and deposit on surfaces. And wherever the sterilant deposits in the right concentrations, that surface would be sterilized. The target market was for pre-hospital environments like ambulances, and the idea is to quickly and inexpensively sterilize beyond wiping and cleaning. So you have to do wiping and cleaning, but after that, the next step is Ambusat. So the pandemic actually increased demand for this product, and what happened was it prompted the development of a second generation design of Ambustat. And one of the objectives of this new design was not only surface disinfection, but also how do you kill airborne pathogens such as the coronavirus, which may be hitching a ride on an ambient floating particle. And we have particles all around us all the time. You know, skin flakes and different equipment and activities generate particles. And the virus can actually attach itself to these airborne particles. So if you were able to disperse the sterilant and have the right size droplets in your fog, then you could kill these airborne pathogens. But another objective that they had was to keep the cost really low so that they could make this technology available to underserved communities and entities such as school districts that can't afford to spend a lot of money on new technologies to go back to get up and running. So our contribution involves sharing our expertise in aerosol physics, sharing our laboratory test capability. We want to help EP&R understand the droplet size distribution of their second generation product. Using different flow settings, we want to understand the fate and the transport of these droplets of liquid sterilant. How does it go into different spaces and geometries? How does it go into crevices, such as if you were to disinfect a police vehicle? How would you disinfect larger spaces such as classrooms or dining areas? So if we can characterize the new Ambustat design to minimize the amount of sterilant that's used, we can keep the cost down, we can keep it just as effective. So I'm really looking forward to getting into the lab to experiment with this new Ambustat with a skeleton crew of colleague researchers. And of course, it'll be a new way of doing experiments where we have to socially distance and follow all the other protocols for not transferring germs to each other.
So Marit, let me ask, if you were to release the fog into a closed space, I know you mentioned ambulances, you mentioned police cars, you also mentioned classrooms. After you have deployed the fog, if you will, the sterilant, the atomized sterilant, how long does it take before you can enter that space, or can you enter right away? How long are we talking about?
Well, the current protocol for sterilizing ambulances is that they can do it in less than 40 minutes of downtime. So if you were to have a bigger area with a lot more sterilant, I imagine you'd have to wait a lot longer. And that's probably one of the questions that we're going to explore as well.
Okay. And then I also want to emphasize, you mentioned the Regional Economic Development Program that, of course, NASA works on with its centers all across the United States. I think this is important. We're getting some feedback now. There we go. this is important for the folks in the media. Marcy Kaptur is a member of Congress from Ohio. She represents the Glenn Research Center, and she's been a huge advocate for regional economic development. I think it's actually impressive and important to note that after all of her advocacy for this program, here you have a capability that is coming from the Glenn Research Center, which she represents, that is going to have potentially a big impact for the future. The other thing I wanted to ask you, Marit, is it possible not just to decontaminate surfaces inside of a closed area with this fog, with this atomized sterilant? Is it possible to use this maybe to decontaminate personal protective equipment so that we can reuse it rather than throw it away on each use? Is that something that it has been considered?
Well, that's a good question. And right now, our Space Act agreement with the company does not cover that, but it is rather open-ended where we can add on additional tasks and define future work together. So that could be something that we would end up going to after our initial testing.
Okay. I have behind me, I have an AmbuSat box. I just thought I'd show it to everybody. If people can see me, they should be able to see the red box behind me. So that's the device that's now used to sterilize the inside of an ambulance after a patient. Is that correct, Marit?
Correct. Well, this is the second generation one. So there are only 3 prototypes that exist, and I'm going to take delivery of one next week to work with it in my lab.
Okay, fantastic. Okay, so next, what I'd like to do. Thank you, Marit, for that great update. Next thing I'd like to do is start talking about our oxygen hoods and some of the regional support activities from our oxygen hoods. This comes from the Armstrong Flight Research Center out in California. You can see behind me, you see the AmbuSat, and here, I guess, Deputy NASA Administrator Jim Morhart is bringing it up front here. So this is the hood. Dr. Polk called it a CPAP hood. And we have a special guest, Mike Buttigieg is on the phone. Are you with us, Mike?
Yep, I'm here.
Awesome. Can you share with us a little bit about what this is and how it can be used?
Sure. I guess thank you, Jim. And I guess I'll start just, I guess with the NASA Armstrong, our typical role is designing, developing, and prototyping and verifying things that are normally related to aircraft. So we're taking those skills and applying them to the needs of our community, of our medical community. And so I think it's great because innovation is just part of our culture. So NASA Armstrong was asked to be part of a joint task force, as we mentioned before, the aerospace COVID response team. And that was, put together so that we can, again, support the local community in what we expected to be shortfalls in PPE and a whole range of potential issues. So I guess what started out as an initial request to 3D print basic things that were designed, but, try to get some much needed items out. It quickly evolved into a whole slew of different projects. So we have like several subgroups working on different amazing devices. And so this one is where I had focused my attention, and it was something that was brought up from one of our local ER doctors, Dr. Kodabash, about using something like a CPAP helmet in order to pressurize a patient's lungs. So the three big requirements that he was hoping to achieve were to pressurize someone's lungs for the reasons that JD mentioned earlier. We wanted to be able to pressurize those lungs with pure oxygen to even make that much. And lastly, and very importantly, protect the staff around COVID-stricken patients. So when I saw Dr. Kodabash demonstrating one of the helmets that he was able to get his hands on, it immediately hit me that I was like, hey, that looks like a cast protector that I used on a broken leg a few years ago. And so it kind of took off from there. And this was one of the ideas presented with this COVID task force, which included Virgin Galactic Spaceship Company, our local college, and then other local aerospace companies. So I worked for a week or so, and continuing actually with Dr. Kodabash to design and develop this hood, make improvements on it. So about a week after we had this concept was presented, I worked with our local chief technologist, David Voracek, who provided the funding to build 50 of these hoods in my garage. So we built these hoods with the idea of being able to understand what scaling it up would look like, and also to provide some quick access to doctors, some quick units to the doctors, so that they can immediately start testing them out and seeing what the pitfalls are. So after some evaluations from the doctors and working with the COVID task force, Virgin Galactic has been made huge contributions in moving to our next step, which is what we're currently doing at this moment, is producing 500 test units. So these test units are going to be going around the country for doctors to use and understand and get trained on, so that the hope of having more, even more improved units with EUA approval can be realized. The EUA, I believe, was submitted yesterday, and so we're working with the FDA to get that approved. And I think we're waiting to see how that goes. Super excited to get these units out to the doctors, and I hope that this will keep patients off ventilators as much as possible, and ultimately save lives.
Awesome. Mike, if you would, for us, can you hear me real quick? Can you hear me?
Yep.
If you would, for the media, can you spell your name for the media, Mike? Say and spell your name, full name.
I'm going to say Buttigieg.
Okay, got it.
I'm going to keep it the same, and it's Buttigieg.
And then as far as the people that are involved in this effort, you mentioned Virgin Galactic, which of course is a suborbital commercial launch company, and NASA has partnerships with them, very important partnerships for science research. And of course, they're gonna be launching commercial astronauts into space here in the very near future from New Mexico and maybe other places around the world. You mentioned another partner in this was a local college. Can you tell us what the college is?
So that's Antelope Valley Community College. And so they've been excellent partners of producing some of the parts for the hoods in mass scale. So they were able to connect with some of their own resources, and in this case, produce in mass the magnetic ports that are on the oxygen hood.
Okay.
So working and producing some other side projects, but that was one of a major contribution and a big help from them.
Mike, excellent brief. My big takeaways are this is going to keep pressure on your lungs. So there's going to be pressure inside of this helmet, if you will. And the idea is then you don't have to be intubated. You don't actually have to go on the ventilator, which is, of course, a big win if you don't have to go on the ventilator. The other thing is, correct me if I'm wrong, but this hood protects the healthcare workers as well, because then you're not shedding virus inside the room where you're currently staying. Is that right, Mike?
That's correct, and that's been a very big focal point of the doctor that we're working with, and some other another particular individual at NASA who's working heavily in how to verify with high confidence that seal around the neck, because that is the critical area and the critical path for or probability of area for having leaks that would get out to the environment.
Awesome. Thank you, Mike. Excellent, excellent brief and excellent work out there in California. So keep up the great work. I'd like to go back to J.D. Polk, Dr. Polk, our Chief of Health and Medical for NASA. There's something that I think is pretty exciting, although it's probably a number of months, if not a year away, and that is trying to create, using NASA technology that we've had on the International Space Station, trying to create a breathalyzer test, if you will, so that maybe one day we can actually test people for the coronavirus just by breathing into a tube. Dr. Polk, if you're still on the phone, I know that's not as close as we'd like it to be, but it's a technology that we've used as an agency in the past for different purposes, and it's a technology that could be modified. Is that right?
Yes, Jim. We've had that technology and have been using that to identify toxic substances as well as other things, especially in a space flight environment. But to simplify it, you're taking these nanotubes and impregnating them with something like an antigen, and then or an antibody, and then the virus, if somebody breathes into that tube, the virus would stick to that antibody and create an electric current or fluoresce or an electric circuit. And so it's literally an ability to potentially instantaneously identify somebody that has COVID-19. And you can imagine how important that would be for somebody like Customs and Border Protection, or employees going into the meat packing plants and other things that we're seeing right now, where it's difficult to identify someone with the virus, especially if they're shedding virus before they become febrile or symptomatic. And that's where this virus has really been difficult for most of the spread throughout the nation.
Awesome. Thank you, Dr. Polk, for that update. What I'd like to do now, there's other things that we could talk about, but I think in the interest of time, I just want everybody to know NASA is an amazing little agency that does astonishing things every day. And now we're using that capability to respond to this pandemic, using a whole of government approach. And I'd like to just open it up to questions. So I don't know, Karen, are you moderating this?
Sure. So anybody who would like to ask questions, you can use the Q&A section in the WebEx platform, or you can raise your little electronic hand in WebEx, and we will open up your line. So we'll just give you folks a second to, and there we go. Miriam Kramer, your line is unmuted.
Not sure the fucking going on.
Okay. Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Great. Hi, Miriam with Axios. This is a question for the administrator. This is a little bit off topic, but I'm just curious. I'm wondering if you guys might be able to speak to some of the precautions that NASA is planning on taking for the commercial crew launch at the end of the month or at the end of May. And are you working with Florida officials to limit crowd sizes? Are you anticipating smaller crowds in general? I'd just love to hear about some of the thinking that you guys have there. Thanks.
Absolutely. We are very excited about launching Commercial Crew here May 27th. This will be the first time we've launched American astronauts on American rockets from American soil since the retirement of the space shuttles back in 2011. And so this is a big deal for the country. It's important for the country. This is our access to the International Space Station, which is a $100 billion investment by the American taxpayer. So we need to make sure that we have access to the International Space Station. Of course, the technology and the capabilities that are coming from the ISS are also astonishing and will have huge impacts for human life here on Earth. So all that being said, the answer is yes, we are moving forward. It is a mission essential function for the United States government to launch Commercial Crew on May 27th. We are asking people, and I would ask people that are reporting on this to make sure that this gets into your article. We are asking people to join us in this launch, but to do so from home. We're asking people not to travel to the Kennedy Space Center. A lot of the folks on the line here know that when we launch to space from the Kennedy Space Center, it draws huge crowds. And that is not right now what we're trying to do. We're trying to make sure we have access to the International Space Station without drawing the massive amount of crowds that we usually would for these activities. And it's especially important now because we haven't done this since 2011. So the crowds are probably going to be bigger than they have been in a very long time. We're asking people to stay at home, to watch from home. We want them engaged. We want them to participate. We want them to tell their friends and family, but we also want them to watch from a place that's not the Kennedy Space Center. So I think that's important. As far as the people that are working on this day in and day out, we have modified shift schedules. So instead of having 12 people work on a rocket all at the same time, we separate them out to where, you know, we've got 4 working for 8 hours, a different 4 working for the next 8 hours, and a different 4 working for the 8 hours after that. So we're dividing things up by shifts. We're also making sure people that are in close proximity have the right personal protective equipment. So these are all the things that we're putting into place. When we think about mission control, you know, when we launch to space, there's a lot of people in the mission control facilities. We need to make sure that we are separating people as much as possible using different rooms. And in fact, those rooms where people are going to be located, maybe having, you know, plexiglass between the different stations. So we're looking at all the things where we can practice the guidelines for social distancing, and at the same time launch this very important mission to the International Space Station. A lot of people who are listening right now already know that when it comes to our astronauts, they quarantine weeks ahead of time before they launch to the International Space Station as a matter of normal practice. Those practices are going to continue for this particular launch as well. So we don't see any risk there. But certainly we want to make sure that we get this activity accomplished. We want to make sure that we're doing it as safely as possible. And what we strive for every day, we strive to make sure that our people that are working on this project are every bit as safe working on it as they would be if they were to stay at home. It's also important to note, and I can't stress this enough, I've stressed it over and over again to our entire workforce and our leadership teams. If there's anybody who feels uncomfortable working on this project, they need to say something, and we will find something else for them to do where they can work from home or they can do other things. The last thing we want to do is make anybody feel uncomfortable working on these projects. And there will be absolutely no retribution if people do want to move on to something else. That being said, I know, as you can imagine, this is a very exciting project and the NASA workforce is very excited about it. So we're doing everything we can to make sure that we're safe as we go forward. But that's a great question. Thank you.
Jeff Michael, your line is open.
All right, thank you very much. This is Jeff Michael. I have 2 questions for Dave Gallagher regarding the ventilator. The first one is, was there a point where your team thought, we're not going to be able to do this? And then was there a turning point when you said, wow, we really have it? And the second question is, what is the actual estimated cost? And is there a mechanism in place to make sure that any corporation manufacturing it will not overly profit from a royalty-free agreement?
Thanks for the question, Jeff. Just a couple. So I think I can answer the first one pretty easily. I like to think of this as just a constant process of leaning forward from the first, you know, the one guy, Dave Van Buren, that was thinking, I've got to do something to help here, sitting down with our chief engineer and starting to sketch things out. I've kind of championed it from a financial and encouragement point of view, but I got to tell you, it's not one turning point. It's been a constant sort of leaning forward. Every time they think they hit a roadblock, somebody comes up with an idea. Having doctors from local hospitals in Los Angeles, as well as frontline doctors in New York and other places involved, having the FDA involved from the beginning has really helped. But people just kept leaning forward. They just wouldn't take no for an answer. Every time they hit a challenge, they'd come up with an idea. Companies would send parts, again, as Mr. Bridenstine said, a lot of the parts are very simple parts that don't interrupt the supply chain of other ventilators. Companies would just send parts and, you know, who knows if we got invoiced for them or not. The cost of manufacturing these ventilators is going to be very low. I don't know that I'm the right person to tell you what that is, but I think it's, $2,000 or $3,000, something like that, as opposed to kind of an order of magnitude more for full up, multi-symptom ventilators that are used in ICUs to handle any situation. So there's a big difference, and a lot of it has to do with the parts count and the ability to deal with every situation versus being a COVID-19 ventilator. I think you asked a second question about the profit of companies doing this. I can't really comment on that other than to say Caltech has waived all the royalties on the licensing, so I think they should be able to be available, very inexpensively to people, hospitals, and organizations that need them. I think anybody profiteering in this environment is getting enough social media shaming and other shaming that I doubt we'll see any of that.
Okay, Chelsea Gold, your line is open.
Hi, thanks so much for taking my question. This is Chelsea Gold with Space.com. I have a question about ongoing science missions. I know that there have already been some adjustments to mission timelines and schedules, and kind of as the pandemic has progressed within the last couple of weeks, I'm wondering if there are any updates to that, if there are any other updates to mission timelines to any particular mission, or especially with regard to any missions that are launching or doing big things this summer, such as the launch of Perseverance.
Yeah, thank you for that question. I'll go ahead and start it. The answer is we have had to work through what missions are essential and what missions are not essential. I will tell you, if you work at NASA, every mission is essential. That's just the way we see it. But we've really had to dive down and say, what are the risks and what are the costs of certain missions? One of the missions I'm very excited about is Mars Perseverance. We used to call it Mars 2020. We now call it Mars Perseverance. I think it's a perfect name for this point in the history of the world. We are in fact persevering, and we're going to launch this robot to Mars, and we're going to do that in July of 2020. Perseverance is going to carry with it the world's first interplanetary helicopter. It's also going to cache samples on the surface of Mars for an eventual Mars return mission. Here's the challenge with Mars Perseverance. There's a unique moment of time every 26 months when Earth and Mars are aligned for a launch to Mars. And if we miss that launch, it can cost us up to $500 million to store Perseverance. And so we want to make sure that we launch it. Putting a robot like that into storage for a period of 2 years is not only very expensive, it also takes a lot of work, and it can increase the amount of risk that we take. David, did you want to address this as far as Mars Perseverance?
Yeah, I'll add on to that we are very proud of staying on schedule. We are currently on schedule. We have some slack in that schedule. We have a team of people down at the Cape that are working it. NASA has provided when we need transportation back and forth between JPL and Florida. NASA has provided that, which has been outstanding for some of the team that are working there. The helicopter has been installed. Things are looking good for the launch date. And as Jim said, we really want to hold that launch window since we won't get a chance for over 2 years. So thanks.
And it's also important to note that when we talk about all of the other science missions that NASA has going on, whether it's heliophysics or planetary science, astrophysics, that data is largely still coming back to Earth, and our scientists have access to it. That's not true in every case, but in most cases, we are still getting amazing science from the missions that have already been launched. And of course, we make sure that science, that data is available to the entire world for free. So I think that's a positive story. Even in the midst of the pandemic, we're still getting amazing science. I would also say we're learning things about the Earth. that that this provides a very unique opportunity where we can see, the impact of human activity on the atmosphere and those kind of things. And we're learning things that we know we need to learn. We think about feedback mechanisms. As carbon dioxide is a greenhouse gas that is causing global warming. At the same time, it's also it's what plants use to breathe, and so we're seeing a greening of the earth. And a greening of the earth actually has a cooling effect on the planet. I guess my point in saying this is we're gonna learn things from this that we wouldn't otherwise have been able to learn. And I think we need to use this very unique moment to get this data, and then get to work on analyzing the data so we can learn what we otherwise wouldn't have been able to learn in this moment of time. So I think it's important to note that we do have missions that we want to go forward on, but we're not because of the pandemic. Most people at NASA right now are working from home, and the people that are going to work on mission essential functions that we have deemed mission essential. The vast majority of the NASA workforce is working from home, and that does in fact slow us down on a lot of our other missions.
Thank you, Administrator. Again, just as a reminder to everyone dialed in, if you have a question, you can raise your hand in the WebEx platform. And I'm going to open up the line for Sean Costello with Spaceflight Insider.
Thank you very much. A question for Dr. Polk. Reference to the ventilator, you mentioned two aspects, basically 1/7 the number of parts, and that the parts were not likely to compete with the typical supply chain. Can you tell me, are those pre-existing parts from other industries? Are they engineered for purpose and will be 3D printed? How are you confident that you won't necessarily be impacting the other industry supply chains?
Yeah, that's a good question, Sean, and I'll let David elaborate on this with his, because of his folks working on this. But the parts do exist right now, hence the reason we already have several prototypes built. So they exist right now, but they're not parts that you would normally necessarily use in the building of the ventilator, and also by the fact that it's got 1/7 of the parts. As David mentioned, 80 some odd parts. That means that there's close to 700 parts out there that we're not using and not having to compete with the supply chain. So just by fact of having immensely less parts and to this, that eliminates a lot of the competition in the supply chain right there, as well as the cognizant ability for the engineers to use parts that already exist that might not be typically used in a ventilator but can be repurposed. But I'll let JPL discuss that or expand on it.
Yeah, it's a great question. Just a couple of quick comments. First of all, as I said earlier, what we do is we build spacecraft, often things that are, we're hoping will last for years or decades. One of the things different about this is that this ventilator is meant to, be storable for 4 or 6 months, and someone could be on a ventilator like this for 3 weeks or something like that. So we don't have to go with the reliability that you would normally have when we're sending something to another planet. The second thing is we have one of our key people was on the project from day one, thinking about manufacturability. And it's just as you said in your question, they're really parts from other industries that can be used in this application so that you don't compete with a ventilator company who's trying to get a very specialized valve or pump that if we took it, we would be interrupting their production flow. So yeah, it's largely from other industries, common parts, and just a very, I'd say, ingenious design for a specific purpose. I hope that answers your question.
All right, thank you, David. Lauren Grush, your line is open.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Great. Thank you so much. Lauren Grush with The Verge. My question is for Jim. Jim, Bridenstine, I wanted to elaborate on what Miriam had asked earlier. You had said that you do not want people to travel to Florida for the DM2 launch. I'm just wondering, are there specific crowd control tactics that you're considering? I know there are a lot of beaches in Florida that people like to congregate on. Just curious if you guys have a plan in place for that eventuality. Thank you.
Yeah, that's an important question. Certainly we do for the Kennedy Space Center. We're not going to open up the Kennedy Space Center to the public the way we normally would. As far as the beaches and the areas around the Kennedy Space Center, those are public roads. We're going to follow the protocols of the past, how we do, crowd control around big launches. The state government gets involved. Obviously, the Highway Patrol has to be involved. So all of the standard things are going to take place, but NASA doesn't have any plan right now to go beyond the Kennedy Space Center as it relates to our activities. That would be left largely to the state of Florida.
Thank you, sir. And next up is Tim Fernholz with Quartz. Your line is open.
Hello, everyone. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Hey, Tim Fernholz from Quartz. Thank you so much for taking the time to talk to us this afternoon. Two quick questions, not to harp on the ventilators again, but I was just curious if there are any companies that have expressed interest in manufacturing these, or if you've begun talking to potential manufacturers. And then I was just curious, maybe the only really important sort of scarcity we haven't mentioned is testing. And I was curious if NASA is working on anything related to testing, and also if that is something that is part of your workforce protection plan at all. Thank you.
I guess I'll start with that one. As far as working with companies, I think that's the purpose of the RFI that they're submitting tomorrow, is to put that out broadly and solicit that. And David can correct me if I'm wrong on that one. And but that's that will garner who's interested in potentially producing and making this ventilator. And then in regards to testing, we are looking at, like the administrator mentioned, we are looking at different technologies, like the technology with the nanotubes that may be able to do testing. But those are months off, or do those currently play into our own surveillance of the virus? Not at the moment. Will they in the future? Certainly they could in the future. But the cleaning technologies and other technologies that are out there right now that we've been developing, like the ones at Glenn, to sterilize an area or to disinfect an area, those are particular technologies that we may use inside of NASA as well, obviously to clean and disinfect areas.
Yeah, I might just add to that we did do an analysis of companies that are out there to make sure that we were kind of going down the right path. And when we did a request for interest, we found a response from 160 companies. So I think there's a good deal of interest out there in manufacturing these things.
All right. Thank you, gentlemen. Marina Corin, if you'd like to ask a question, your line is open now.
Hi, can everyone hear me okay?
Yep.
Hi, everyone. I hope you and yours are well. This is a question for the administrator. Jim, you said that you're encouraging anyone who is working on commercial crew right now and who might be uncomfortable about still going into work to speak up and let managers know so that other arrangements can be made. Has anyone come forward with this concern? And if so, how many people have done so?
That's another important question. So I asked that same question last week to Bob Cabana, the center director down at the Kennedy Space Center. And his answer was there really haven't been. There have been maybe a couple that were wondering, are we doing the right things? But nobody has said, and we've been very clear, if you don't feel safe, then we'll find something else for you to do. But I'm telling you, this is a mission that NASA's been working on for a long time, and there's a lot of very motivated people on it. So we haven't really had any really challenges on that.
All right, thank you, sir. Again, if you have any questions and would like to ask a question of this panel, go ahead and raise your hand in the attendee screen, and we will open your line for you.
You know,
Jack-
I might
I'm sorry, go
defer
ahead.
that question beyond commercial crew. Mars 2020 is a mission essential function as well. David, can you tell us? You've got the workforce there at JPL that's working on this mission. Can you share with us how they're what is the sentiment? Are you having any challenges with people saying, "Hey, we don't feel comfortable doing this"?
What we've done is we've been doing. JPL has about 6,000 employees. We've been doing surveys to kind of take the temperature of how people are feeling. All but probably 350 are working from home. It's actually fascinating how much you can accomplish via WebEx. I have a scary feeling we're going to have a hard time getting everybody to come back when this is over. But having said that, the survey results would indicate that people feel that they're largely effective, efficient. I think the highest stress for people being home is dealing with kids and no school and childcare that doesn't exist. So we're trying to be sensitive and help with that. We're encouraging people to still take time off when they need time off. One of the things about working this virtual way is you spend 10 hours a day sitting in front of a screen. It's actually much more exhausting than a normal day of work. The message that we give to everybody, to your question, is really that, you know, no one is being forced to come to work. If you don't feel comfortable coming to work, then you can telework and stay at home. And there's the occasional job that can't be, their job is not able to be done remotely. And for those people, they can still stay at home and take administrative leave. So we're trying to be very sensitive to that.
Awesome. Thank you, Dave. Jackie Goddard, your line is open to ask a question.
Thank you. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Thank you. A few weeks ago, I know there was talk of NASA making available its supercomputers if they were needed for any of the data crunching for the fight on COVID. I wondered if that came about and if any of that capacity has been used. Thank you.
Yes, that did come about. I'd like to turn it over to the Deputy NASA Administrator, Jim Moore.
Yes, and we have mobilized our supercomputers. We've got 2 of the top 20 fastest supercomputers in the United States. And we're working with the White House Office of Science and Technology Policy to do modeling on COVID-19 with those supercomputers. So, and we're certainly looking for other opportunities to use them also.
Thank you very much, sir. That was the last question for this event. I would like to thank everyone who called in to join in this conversation, and I would like to thank our panelists. All of you media on the line know how to contact me, so if you have any follow-up questions, karen.northern@nasa.gov. And all our visuals associated with the projects that we discussed today are available online at nasa.gov/coronavirus. We have videos and images there, and you can find out more about other projects that the agency is working on to help in the nation's response to coronavirus. Again, I would like to thank you all for joining the call today, and we look forward to keeping the conversation with you guys going as we move along.
Hey, Karen,
Yes, sir.
would it be all right if I made a closing statement?
Of course.
Thank you. I just want to say thank you to everybody for being on this call. I do think it's important. We are on the heels of Earth Day, and we have a unique opportunity right now to study the Earth in ways that we otherwise would not have that opportunity. When I was in the House of Representatives, I was very involved in weather activities. I had constituents die in tornadoes every year. Just the other day, my wife and I were driving in Texas, and we had 21. This was in fact yesterday. We were driving in Texas down to the Johnson Space Center, and we had 21 or 22 tornadoes that hit the state of Texas, and a lot of damage, and even people died. We know that there's a correlation between carbon dioxide and weather. We know that. We know that because of NASA, we know that carbon dioxide has a cycle where it stays in the atmosphere for at least 10 years. We also know that we're seeing, a lot less particulate in the atmosphere and those kind of things. I don't think it should be missed that at this point in time, there are things that we can learn that we otherwise could not learn about how the atmosphere is affected by human activity and how that results in weather and other activities. And I think it's important that that NASA as a workforce, as an agency, that we do what is necessary to use this very unique moment to learn what we can, because we're not going to have an opportunity like this. And I know I'm not trying to say this is a good opportunity. Believe me, we wish we weren't in this position. But there are things that we can learn that we otherwise couldn't learn. And I think that's an important takeaway from where we are right now. That's all I have. And I also want to say, finally, the NASA workforce is amazing. Tomorrow is my 2nd anniversary of being the NASA administrator. I will tell you, this has been the absolute honor of a lifetime, and to see so many people working so hard, even from home in very difficult conditions, and people, in fact, willing to go to work for these important missions for the nation. It's humbling. I'm not going to lie. Sometimes it's daunting to lead this agency, given the caliber of people that are here. But it's an honor of a lifetime, and I'm very excited about what the next year brings. So with that, I'll turn it back over to you, Karen.
All right. Happy anniversary, sir. Cards
Thank you.
All right. Thank you again, everyone, for joining us today. Again, check out nasa.gov/coronavirus. Stay healthy, stay safe. We'll be in touch.